When you decided to leave, did you just quit? Did you give a 2-week notice? Did you have, it sounded like this is something that you want to do for a long time. So did you have like a big savings account to kind of hedge, just to kind of help you get off the ground?
Well, my expenses were extremely low at the time, so I didn't really need to have that much saved. There wasn't that much overhead that went into it. There was a little bit more than maybe I expected, but there wasn't much. And then, no, I had a non-compete when I left, so I couldn't take any of my clients with me. So I was living in New York and I was recruiting for companies in Boston remotely at the time. And basically just printed out a sheet of companies that were hiring for, I think the market I started with was DevOps and infrastructure roles, which if outside of technology, it's a pretty niche market. And just basically started sending emails and calling companies on day one. And then I got my first client or potential client to respond. And she said she went on my website, and I didn't have a website at the time. So then she asked me about how long I'd been in business, and basically then I figured out, okay, I need to get a website together. This company, if I start having some success, I need to have some sort of online presence. So then I built the website, and then picked up first client, did my first placement off of, I think it was a Monster resume. It was pretty easy. It wasn't necessarily easy to find, but it was, not like it is now. I don't use Monster anymore. And then I was off to the races. I think I took a small loan from my dad that I then paid back within like with my first placement. Basically, it was
amazing,
just to keep me going to start.
Welcome to the Kickstart podcast. My name is Preston. On this episode, we have the pleasure of meeting someone who actually started at the same recruiting agency that I did, who quickly evolved into becoming an awesome founder of a fast-growing recruiting agency. Joe, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So for those that don't know who you are and your background, would you mind just sharing a little bit of high level of who you are and what you've done over the past couple of years?
I'm a co-founder of Grow Recruiting, which is a technology recruiting agency. So we fill everything from software to infrastructure, DevOps, QA, basically anything tech focused for companies all over the US. We were focused mainly in New York, but we've since expanded since the pandemic. So small firm, but we have a lot of pretty well-known clients, some great startups, and yeah, that's what we do. So
super cool. A lot to talk about in terms of you running your own business, starting that, but I want to take a step back and just learn a little bit about how you got to where you are now. So like me, if I remember correctly, you started at really the same nationwide agency. And I believe it was fresh out of college, right? So would you be able to maybe share like how you actually got that job? Was it fresh out of college? Were you interviewing other jobs?
Yes. So it was the first job I got out of college, my first official job. I had some odd jobs in college, but first desk job, and it was promoted as a sales job on LinkedIn. I was living in Boston at the time, and my girlfriend now my wife was from New York and was living in New York. So I was just looking for any job really to get to New York. And my father owns a sales company, a small sales company. So, I didn't have any connections into like the corporate finance or retail or real estate, space. So I thought sales would be a good place to start. And then I would, quickly move on to something else outside of recruiting. But here I am, over 10 years later, still doing it. So
initially you thought this was a sales job before the interview started.
So it was posted as a sales or business development. Maybe it wasn't posted as a recruiting job. Even like, I think even when I showed up to the office at the time, I didn't even know what a recruiting firm was, but they had some pretty impressive people working there and talked about, how recruiting is sales, how you have to find clients and candidates, since it was a 360. For people that don't know what that is, 360, you do both the client and the candidate side. Talked about how basically if depending on how well you did, how quickly you can move up into a lead and then a management, and how the commission structure worked. And it seemed like these people were making a lot of money. So yeah, that interested me. I honestly, though, when I took the job, thought I was going to quickly move into something else. I think I was still like taking real estate classes at the time.
Interesting. I actually thought about being a real estate agent too before becoming a recruiter.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of crossover in that.
Yeah.
in those industries. So you don't have to. It's there's not really too much of a barrier to entry, and if you do well, you can you can make a lot of money. So that's what interested me. So
that's so funny. Well, my experience was the exact same as you. I was also on the market for a sales role, and I think they called it a sales associate or sales analyst, something like that. I applied and I had no idea it was actually a full desk recruiting position at a recruiting agency. And like you, I had no idea that the recruiting industry even existed, let alone what recruiters actually did. So that's how I entered, funny enough. And then
a little bit of a bait and switch, but it worked, I guess.
A little bit of a bait and switch. But look at us now.
Exactly.
After all these years. So you went through the interview process. How was the interview process at an agency like that for you?
I think they're just looking for personality mostly for that interview. I didn't really have any interview experience. So I remember I was pretty nervous, honestly. I wanted the job because I wanted to move. And I had some other stuff lined up, but I sent them an email after, my manager, she was from the same area that I went to college, so we had some connections that way. But yeah, I mean, they hired a lot of people and they fired a lot of people very quickly. So I think they were looking for personality, and they kind of the cream rises to the top in that type of space. So if you can do well there, you can really do well anywhere, I felt. But the interview process, I think, was pretty straightforward. They just wanted to get to know you. It wasn't that hard hitting. I don't know if yours was a little different. But.
No, I felt like if you had 2 lungs, 2 arms, 2 legs, you're able to speak English. You're hired.
Exactly.
No, mine was pretty straightforward. I mean, I think it was like a 30-minute, just super easy, like first round cultural call. Then they invite you to the office. You sit and meet different members. I think it was 3 or 4 different members, 5-10 minutes per person. And then they have you do like a little mock exercise as well, kind of like, throwing into the deep water, seeing how you.
Yeah, I don't think I had I think the exercise for my time, but I sat in on a couple of interviews for the exercise. So.
Oh, interesting. So you never did it yourself?
No, you didn't have to do that.
I was
fortunately, I guess it seems a little bit more intimidating, to be honest, than my interview process. But
I was super nervous. I was scared. I think the whole purpose of it was a role play exercise where I had to come in acting like I was a recruiter, and then the people who were interviewing me pretended they were like the founders or hiring managers, and I essentially had to pitch like why they had to work with me as a recruiter. And it's, again, the whole purpose of that is to really mimic what we go through when it comes to lead gen and business development. So I think if you can operate and you can survive that, they'll probably have a good chance of them hiring you. And so that's what happened. Funny enough, though, do you remember how you dressed? And the reason why I ask is I didn't really do too many interviews before this. So I was extremely inexperienced. I was nervous and stressed out like you, but I remember I did over the top when it comes to like how I dressed for the interview. I walked in with like a full suit. I did the whole tie get up. I don't know if you did the same, or like you walked in a little bit more business casual, kind of just a little bit toned down. But I think
I did the same.
You did the same.
I think it was a pretty bit. Yeah, the suit didn't fit me great. That was like my first. So it was pretty baggy suit. Looking back at some pictures of it, but I actually lived in Boston, and they didn't know for some reason. I think maybe I put New York on my resume. So I took the train down, and then they took the train home, and then they called me back in to come in back in the next day. Took the train down again. So I took the train down 3 times. And meanwhile, they thought I was living in New York. I was actually taking a 4-hour train ride to and from Boston to New York. I might have spent the night, but it was it probably cost me like $500 to interview there. So train rides back and forth.
I didn't know that. You didn't interview at the Boston office, or they didn't like forward you or introduce you to someone at the Boston office?
No, I think they must have thought that I was in New York for some reason.
That is so funny.
And I never mentioned it just because I was, didn't want to ruffle any feathers. So.
Wow. So Joe, now you can tell people that you actually paid money to interview at a company. I think, there's not too many other people in that crowd with you, but that's a funny story. Yeah. So you get in, you got the job. And then how was like your first 6 to 12 months there? You mentioned that you did odd jobs throughout college. Your dad was an entrepreneur as well, working a sales job. So how much of learning and absorbing the entrepreneurial, like work-life balance or work ethic from your dad, or maybe even the odd jobs that you did throughout college, how much of that played a huge factor in finding success at an agency and recruiting for you?
Well, initially, since I was not planning to stay, I really didn't like the job initially. It was hard because you just were cold calling, you were getting hung up on a lot. They had that dial kind of that phone with like 12 different lines, and you would just pick a line and start calling phone numbers. So it was tough. I mean, you go in Monday morning at 8 a.m. and you just start making calls, and really it's in the beginning, it's a ton of rejection. Not that it's not, the job itself is a lot of rejection. So it was hard to get into the mindset that like I was going to see any success from this, but they trained really well. And as I got better at it, and as I started seeing success and saw there were some pretty impressive people at the companies, some salespeople. And as I saw them being successful, I did, start to see a future in the business, but it did take some time. I think a lot of people give up before they kind of see success. That's why there's so much turnover, especially for junior people. But I was pretty determined to, find some success and do well, because I just felt like, if you worked hard enough, if you put in the time, if you've got, were able to get good at your craft, which is like talking to people and, making connections and following up, and if you had determination, I saw that those people did well. So I felt like eventually I was going to break through, and that did happen. So
you never thought you wanted to quit?
No, I did think I wanted to quit. Definitely in the beginning. I think a lot of people do, but I also saw, I looked longer term, and I think a lot of people that quit probably look shorter term. They weren't enjoying it. It's not, initially it's not a job unless you see immediate success which a lot of people don't. But no, I saw the longer term, the opportunity to, move into a lead position and make a lot more commission and develop clients and develop the business. And that all interested me, but the rejection and, just the nature of the office that we were in initially. Yeah, I definitely wanted to quit. I think probably the first 6 months. Like, I think probably most people do, honestly, unless you're just a really gritty salesperson.
I think if you don't see any sign of like positive result, it's very difficult. So like, do you remember how fast it took you to get your first client?
It was within the first 3 months. I remember, so the client, I called it, the first client I had that I developed on my own, they passed a couple over to us, to kind of give us some wins. But
wow, wait, hold on a second. You got clients handed to you as a noob? I've never had that happen.
I actually don't know if it was
first, like 10, 11 months.
Yeah, didn't happen often. But I know. The first client I picked up, I called in. It was a company called Telepayment. I don't even know if they're still around. It was a Harvard group of people from Harvard that started like a car insurance sort of company. Called up, pitched .NET developers to the business manager, and he hung up and basically didn't think anything of it. And then like a week later, got a call from the CTO, and then they ended up coming in and doing interviews, and I think they placed 8 people there in the first year. So that was a really good client, and that was a good win, because it was, one of those calls that you really don't expect anything to come out of. And I feel like that's how a lot of the times how it happens in recruiting. It's not always how you plan it out, but if you put the time in and you talk to enough good people, then good things will happen.
So do you think that if you have a reasonable work ethic, Joe, and then you just end up not quitting, do you think it's inevitable that you're going to start seeing really good results in recruiting? So the people that quit prematurely, you think it was basically too early and premature for them? If they just stuck in, kept their head down and kept at it, eventually they would have found success. Like, do you believe that?
Yes, I do. Because I don't think that it's not rocket science, but it does take determination. You have to be consistent every day. You have to put the time in, and you will eventually see results. I mean, there's just so much potential business out there, and if you learn the craft, which is, there's a lot of different things that go into it, but I do think I also think it takes a certain type of person. There was people that I saw in the business that just weren't able to talk to clients, whether it be they just put them on a pedestal, or for another reason they just couldn't kind of gather their thoughts in that moment, which I think is a lot of, sales is a mix of just being able to communicate with people, but it also takes, critical thinking too. So, but I do think if you work hard enough, you'll see success.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Would you say that recruiting is a sales job?
Definitely. Yeah.
100%. There's actually a lot of people, many of them who could be listening right now, that actually don't agree. But I think if you've never gone through a proper sales role, you wouldn't know that what you actually do day to day is actually sales related. which is funny enough, right? If you've worked in sales, you worked in the agency world, you know, simple things like outreach, customization, feedback, understanding obstacles, that's all sales at the end of the day, right?
Yeah,
so
especially if you're doing 360 sales. I mean, I don't know. It'd be hard to say how it is in a sales job. You know, you have to pitch, you know, there's a lot of recruiting firms out there. You have to pitch yourself to the client, then you have to pitch your company, and then you have to pitch a candidate. So, you know, you're not just selling a product, you're selling, you know, someone to hire that can ultimately make their own decision. So you have to do the selling on the candidate side too. So
exactly. So to give the viewers a little context, the agency that Joe and I worked at was full desk, meaning that we were responsible of doing everything from finding our own clients to like finding our candidates. A lot of agencies out there actually split the two functions on two different teams. So sometimes that's all sometimes you only focus on the biz dev side, and others you only focus on the candidate side. But for us, we essentially did everything. It's as close as you can be to like running your own business as an entrepreneur. But in the beginning, it's a little bit different now, but in the beginning, it was very, very difficult. I do not want to understress that. I think a lot of people come into recruiting, think it's an easy job. It's especially on the agency world, it is not. I know when you and I first started, cold calling is huge. I know cold calling is still effective, but I'm sure with in-mails and emails and other methods now, there's a lot of different tools that you can use. But for our agency, that was very much like the primary tool to get into companies. And just a quick experience, Joe, I actually remember almost every single day. I remember I have to like, I got a cup of coffee, and if I had to go to the bathroom, I would just go to the bathroom, but I would go and just stand for like 5-10 seconds in front of the mirror, take deep breaths, like, Preston, you got this. I got like 70 to 90 calls that I had to ring this day, and I got to just survive. And I just told myself, just keep at it. Don't give up. And if you can just, you know, learn as much as you can, stay consistent, you'll see results eventually. But it was tough. Some days my ears were ringing, and just even talking about that now just gives me a little PTSD.
No, it's a grind. It was a grind.
It's a grind.
And it still is now. You know, I think now a lot of people say, okay, it's, you know, it's not as much cold calling or, you know, but you're still, when you message someone over email, you still eventually need to talk to them on the phone, even though it's, you know, a setup call, it's technically a warm lead or whatever it may be. You know, they may be talking to 5-6 other recruiters, and, you know, you still need to sell yourself. I think that people sometimes will go into a warm call with a little bit more, I don't know, lackadaisical, feeling like they don't need to close the business, but, you know, you're selling yourself. I feel like, especially in recruiting, in every interaction. So I still take time, you know, in feedbacks and follow-ups to, you know, craft my emails to my clients and candidates, you know, because there's a lot of competition out there for us recruiters. So
absolutely. You can't be a successful recruiter and just hide behind emails all day. You just have to man up and talk to someone. Okay. So you joined, what team were you on specifically? What was your focus?
.NET and QA.
Ooh.
Which those two aren't really related. So I don't know why that was a team.
I guess it made sense at the time.
Yeah.
So you joined that, and then how quickly did you, so we joined as a kind of a recruiting coordinator or an associate recruiter, and how quickly did it take for you to kind of get promoted to kind of a senior lead recruiter? And then at that point, how fast did it take you to get promoted to a manager? I think you mentioned you ended up, before you left, managing a small team.
Yeah. So I was a lead about a year and a couple months.
Nice.
But made it to a lead, which at the time I think was like a little over 20 placements. Once you did like 20 plus placements, it varied a little bit, but and then it became a team manager another year and a couple months after that. Becoming
lead after 20 placements, a little over a year, that's actually really fast. From my experience, I mean, it took some people, especially at my office, like on average, probably roughly around 2 years. So it took me a little over a year as well, similar to you, to kind of hit that lead. And I honestly just backed it up with hard work. But like, it was surprising to me that it just took some people much, much longer. So kudos to that. How did your responsibilities and scope change being a lead recruiter and then becoming a manager at an agency?
Yeah, when you were an individual contributor, you basically just had to focus on your own accounts. Everyone shared candidates on the team, but you had your own accounts. And then when you moved up to a lead and a manager, you got commission off of everyone's placement. So you basically just focused on, you know, it was just more of a focus on everyone, like the team's accounts, bringing in candidates for all different accounts, and then training people at the same time. The company did a really good job of kind of training you how to train. because everyone started at the same level. So you were trained, and then you were basically expected to train people the same way. Everyone kind of has their own style, but it was pretty much learned by doing. So, but you throw people into the fire on day one. I think assuming that you did the same. I think we were calling candidates on like third or fourth day we started, and then clients like 2 weeks in. So you learn pretty quickly if you're going to make it or not, and then how to train people. So the responsibilities definitely changed, and then you're expected to have your team do well, not just yourself. So you put a little bit more pressure on some other people too outside of yourself.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you subscribe for other great stories that are coming up. If you need any help with hiring, know of anyone who's looking for a job, or would like to be a guest on this podcast, please feel free to reach out to us at www.kickstartfinder.com. Really, really appreciate it, and we'll see you on the next one.